At this point, I would like to welcome you to the 2020 series of free webinars sponsored by the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, the Quebec Association for Suicide Prevention, and the Centre for Research and Intervention on Suicide, Ethical Issues, and End-of-Life Practices at the Université du Québec à Montréal. These sessions are being held during the week that we had reserved for our conference this year, but due to COVID, it has now been postponed to the week of, beginning with the pre-conference, the week of October 26, 2021 in Montreal. We hope you'll check out our respective websites to get more details as they become available. My name is Karen Latofsky. I am a member of the Conference Organizing Committee on behalf of CAS. Today, I have the sincere pleasure of introducing Michel Tousignant, who will be speaking on suicide clusters, interpersonal contagion, or collective demoralization. Aside from his affiliation with UQAM and CRISE, I hope you'll check out his fuller biography when you have a chance. He will be speaking for about 40 minutes, after which we will have 20 minutes for questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see an icon that says Q&A. Please put your questions in that box. I will be reviewing it throughout the presentation and will select some of your questions. Unfortunately, we can't do all of them, and cluster if there are themes. All of the presentations are being recorded and will be available on the websites of CRISE, AQPS, and CAS in the following weeks. Please check that out. I now invite our presenter to begin his presentation. Thank you, Michel.
Je prends celui-là à gauche, oui. Voilà. Okay. Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to do a presentation of a research we've been doing extend over the last 22 years. You'll see it's a long process. It's not something you can do in half a year or even 2 years because we have been really interested in following a series of suicide clusters, which in French would be a series of suicide. It's less used in English because cluster is a very wide concept, meaning the aggregation of many suicides. But in a series of suicides, what is being implied is that there are some links between the suicide. There are people who know each other, who may have been influenced directly or indirectly. And so it's a more organic concept than the cluster, which has been mainly a statistical concept. The series of suicide that I would like to present today are really have a rare incidence. They make a lot of talk, they are covered, but in fact, we don't think that they include more than 1 to 5% of the suicides occurring in a population. It's rare incident except among First Nation, and even there, even where in some First Nation villages, you have a series of suicide, they may be 10, 15 years without having another one. So even there, it's not a very frequent thing. But I think it's interesting because my training has been in community psychology, but also my PhD thesis was more anthropological. I study concepts of illnesses among the Mayan community of southern Mexico. So I'm interested in point of view to understand the social cultural context of suicide. And in that respect, the series give us a privilege opening to see the more social and cultural elements involved in suicide, which are more difficult to see if we just see a series of individual suicide. Just a minute, I have a problem getting to the next. Okay. The questions I would like to address in this webinar this afternoon, well, are at two levels. One is more individuals, because I'm interested by a critical evaluation of the concept of contagion, and I would like to know what are the interpersonal influences between individual suicides in the case of clusters of series of suicides. So this question is more individual, would be the first part of my presentation. But in the second part, I will look at under another perspective, and that's the role of the social climate of an environment on a series of suicide. So I'll come back to these two questions later on. Let's see. I'm not. Nope. Okay, excuse for the little technical problem, but I'll get used to it. Very rapidly, what's the methodology? How do you identify a series? Well, you can read the newspaper, but the chances that you will hit a series.
If I may, can you put in the
just
diaporama? Yes.
Okay.
Ça va être plus.
Just a minute, we have a little technical
Yes.
change, which will help us to go from.
Désolé.
Okay. So it's certainly difficult to. Okay, how do you identify the series? Well, it took maybe 2 or 3 years to develop a network of informants all across Quebec through the Quebec Association for Suicide Prevention, the Suicide Prevention Centers, and the CRISE network. So it's through meeting these people repeatedly that we got the knowledge that something was succeeding, was happening somewhere. And so we would inquire if the phenomenon would be similar to the series we wanted to study. Sometimes it was, so we had to validate that. We also contacted some psychologists who were involved in some of these series and who had a lot of experience that was very useful. And we were privileged to have this collaboration. But, you know, these things take years. It's not something that you can go full time because you never know when a series will be occurring. So you have to find some money to pay people from other projects. Sometimes you cheat a little bit, but altogether it worked very well because most of my teams were working on other projects, and they could be used for a couple of weeks to work on one series. It's also these things happen also, as we'll see next, in very different communities, very far from Montreal. A lot of these sites were at least 500 kilometers from Montreal. So there's also the long, long drive or a long traveling in the bus to reach the community. So it's been quite a feat to accomplish all that. Now, once you have identified the community, you need a partner on place who is ready to receive you. It's often the local public health or the members of Suicide Prevention Center who's been working on the site. But it's not easy. Sometimes it's easy because the Suicide Prevention Center are doing a wonderful job of introducing us, the goals of our study. They understand what we're doing. They know it's going to be useful in some way. But sometimes people are a bit reticent, hesitant because they don't want to have too much publicity. They already have too much in the media. Their community is being stigmatized, and sometimes we communicate with people, but it takes a long time to get an answer. So sometimes we had to send two young researchers who look very naive, innocent to the field, and they get there, they meet the people, and they get the trust. This community, they need to know you, to trust you. If you do it by phone, by email, it's not working. It's the same in the Indigenous community. So if you send someone on the site and they can see the person, touch him, not in a situation of pandemic for sure, but they will get the trust. And after a few hours, their agenda were full of interviews. So we had the first epidemiological approach. We wanted who committed suicide, when, in which circumstances, and the best way to do it is to validate the case in the coroner's report. So we had a very good help from the coroners, and we could have access to the police investigation, which are much more detailed in Quebec than the coroner's report. Sometimes they interview 10 persons with the same interview pattern. So we see if there is a little currents, and we know a lot of facts about the interpersonal relationships between the suicide. So our approach was not basically, it was psychological, but it was also ethnological. So it was multidisciplinary. We had two sociologists who contributed. We had even one journalist was very helpful because they are very well trained in investigation. So it was a very complementary competence to do this research. So we approach for sure the staff from the public health. They have sometimes taken care of the people who committed suicide a bit later, the mental health services. So we had a lot of information, a lot of collaboration from them. They put us into contact with the other members of the community. We rely also on the leaders of the community. The mayor is a very important person. He can give us a more global image of the town or the villages, where it's going, are there crises, what's the state of the social climate. We interviewed the priest who, I've been repeatedly doing the funerals. The school director also is a very important person, especially if there is a suicide in a school, and it happens quite a few times that even at, I think one or two of them were in the primary school. So it's really a big shock. And so from the school direction, we have also the reactions of the parents, reactions of the students. So it's very important to know what's going on in the community after these things. And then we have for sure the residents, we even have some bar employees. And sorry, I'm looking. And also we rely on newspapers archives. Many years after doing the field work, we discovered from the archive of the newspaper that people had done interesting interviews, investigation. Like in one of the villages, there was a whole story of a priest who had abused boys for many, many years. So we had a story, we had much more information in this newspaper article than we had gathered on the site. So this is the province of Quebec. I cannot show you, but all the sites that we have. So we have 13 sites altogether. We have 9 which come from Quebec non-First Nation community and 4 in First Nation community. So it's interesting to do also comparison between these 2 groups of people. Unfortunately, the sites were very far, so we have it all over Quebec. We had one in Gaspésia, which is the peninsula you see to the right. We had one on the other side of the St. Lawrence River in that area. We had one in the Estrie near the New Hampshire border. We had 2 around Montreal, small communities. And we had one in Mont-Laurier, we had in Val-d'Or, in also Lebel-sur-Quévillon, and so many. And we had 4 communities. 3 of them were in the Atikamekw territory, and the other in the Anishinaabe. So we'll see here, they are listed. So there are mostly small communities, except one which was Val-d'Or, which at the time was 24,000. So that's a lot of work. As you see, that many of these were quite far from Montreal, and it was a lot of traveling during the more or less 14 years that the field trip covered the site. So. Okay, what's the definition of an epidemic or of contagion? We have many point of view, but if we go back to the dictionary, or we try to adopt a public health definition, and so it's an outbreak of disease that spreads quickly and affects many individuals at the same time. So the thing that spreads quickly is important, as we'll see, and affects many individuals at the same time. It can also be, because there is another larger usage, it's incidence of health problem like obesity. We know that obesity is not communicable, is not contagious, but it's the usage in sometimes in public health reports to talk of epidemiology of obesity, but we know that there are no direct contagion between the cases. So contagion is defined as the infection of one person by another person, but still here, especially in English, sometimes is the infection by a social emotion, though it takes another more metaphorical meaning than the public health definition. So, so we come to a Canadian study. It's interesting way. We see it in many articles, especially before 2015. A study published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal reported that youth who are exposed to suicides among their peers are more at risk of suicide themselves. This phenomenon is known as suicide contagion. So it's not the only research that made such conclusion. There are very well made research that proves that people who are more exposed to suicides are more likely either to commit suicide or to commit suicide attempt. So it is certainly a statistical association, but it's hard to know if it's suicide contagion because we don't know exactly the nature of the link, the nature of the interaction between these two persons. So I would hesitate to talk about contagion without analyzing further the association. And we had also a contrary, very critical view from a Joyner, who's been editing for many, many years, the suicide and life-threatening behavior. And he says, well, he has another view completely different of contagion. He said, these people get together because on the basis of their vulnerability, there are people who got family problems in their youth, and they tend to group together, and that's why they are likely to commit more suicides. And also they live in a milieu where they have the same stress and so on. So he's against the use of contagion in these situations. There is a critical review, I think it's the best that's been done up to date in 2014 by Cheng Li and two others. It's interesting because the Cheng and Li are of Chinese origin. One is Hong Kong, the other in China. And they know what a pandemic is because they had lived through 2 or 3 pandemics before 2014. And they wanted to propose a stricter use of the word contagion in the study of suicide clusters. In their review, 69 records use contagions as the equivalent of clustering phenomena. That is, if suicides happen together, well, they're necessary contagion, which is not really a proof because you can have 3 suicides happening in the neighborhood, the people don't know each other, and you can not really conclude that there is a contagion before this suicide without proving that they were in contact and they influence each other. That's what we have been trying to do. There is 38 records who they don't even define what they mean by contagion. And the majority, fortunately, they refer to various mechanisms underlying clustering phenomena, especially many variations of the concept of imitation. So we will come back on for that. We'll go over that one. So my key questions, is can a suicide cause or trigger another suicide? I prefer the term trigger than cause because epistemologically trigger is more easy to define. Usually in the literature, what you see is the criteria of temporal proximity. So it's usually less than 3 months, but we can have some exception, and we have to detail the exceptions to prove that there's been a direct influence. The methodology that we followed is that if there is a direct influence, it should be that the first suicide was the main serious event having provoked a second suicide without any other serious event happening in the case of the second suicide. For instance, we had a case where 2 close friends died at 1 month interval. So, you know, you think they've been friends for 20, 25 years, maybe more. You think, you know, the first one has really been the cause of the other, but we interviewed the family and they say, no, it's not like that. He said the second one has his own problems and he was suicidal before the first one committed suicide. And the 2 were really affected by serious psychological problems. And they say, you know, the second one committed suicide because of his own reasons, but for sure there's been some influence from the first one, but it's more that it will it will make him more vulnerable than causing directly. So we'll see 3 series among the 13 that we had looked at. This is one in the village of 2000. So it's the image of, it's a photo from with a member of the group who was a photographer who worked later in Montreal. So he was not there during the series of suicide, but these people are Pee-wee. So at the time, Pee-wee was 12, 13 years old in Canada. And 3 of these young people committed suicide 25 years later. And in this cohort of young people, we have 9 persons who committed suicide. So here is the series in details. So we have to the left by order the name of the person. It's very interesting because it's a series in the 40s. There was a tendency to think that it mainly happened among adolescents, but it's not true. What we found is that we have a lot of young adults between 20 and 24, and we have also series in the middle ages, like this one, which mainly included people between 40 and 49 years of age. The first one, as we see in the second column, is the time difference between the suicides, between the previous suicides. So C2 is the example I was giving, is 1 month after the first one. The other one followed by 12 months. The other by 6 months, and 9, and 5, and 3, and 3, and 3. So there is not this close temporal time proximity in those series, as in the definition of a series, but we put that together because they were considered as part of a wave. And you see the relationship, they were mostly friends, close friends, or part of the group member. And but no case, we didn't find a proof of direct link of one suicide who has caused another one in that series. We'll go to the next series. It's a similar, this one is a younger. There are people who are, 2 people who are 3 who are teenagers, and 4 who are young adults. And also we just found one direct influence in a small series, the B series, because sometimes you may have many series. You can have 1, 2, or 3, and you have what they call an eco series in literature. That's a series that is kind of equal to another one, but it's not directly related. And also in that series, we found very few, we just found one example of direct link. It was 4 months difference. It was a young person who was barely 11 years old, and his cousin had committed suicide 4 months before. So he started to, his situation deteriorated, and he committed suicide after 4 months. So there was no other intervening serious events. So we decided that it was a direct link. Now we'll go to First Nation. It was really a real tragedy because 3 young adolescents, females, committed suicide within 3 days. So it's really, you've seen there's been a lot of, the mourning was very, very big. There were 700 people at the funeral. It's almost all the adults of the village of 1,200. So it was really a big impact. Here we have the series. It included 6 persons. We have a young person of 18. We have 2 index cases because A1 and A2 apparently committed suicide at the same time or the same day. The second one was found hanging outside of the village 2 days after, but the examination came to the conclusion that she had died 2 days before. So we had 2 index cases in that situation, and then a third person living about 300 to 400 kilometers away, but they were closely and they had socialized very much between each other. They were part of the same sports club. And the other one committed suicide 3 days after. So it's a very close, it's almost simultaneous. We didn't have any proof of a pact, but we think because the 3 young person had been abused, sexually abused and seduced by the same men without knowing it, and they discovered it. And 2 of the young person were pregnant. So we think there's been a pact, but we didn't have any proof, any written proof or confidence that they gave to other person. It happened so quickly. We have also 2 other cases, is interesting, of direct link in A4 and A6. And this is often what happens when we have a direct link, is the person who has discovered the body of a precedent suicide. So it's a very traumatic situation, which is likely to make people very vulnerable to commit suicide, to make suicide, soon after. So in that case, we have many links, direct links between the suicide. Altogether, in Quebec, we had about 20, let's go to the bottom line, out of 35 possibilities, at the bottom to the right, we had 9 direct links for a total of 35 possibilities. So it's 26% is significant, but it's not the totality. We cannot talk really of a real contagion. Among the First Nation people, because we had two packs, another one who included 4 persons. So out of 24 suicides in 4 villages, in fact, it's more than 24 suicides because we don't include the index case, so it should be 28. But there are 24 possibilities of direct link, and so we found that 54% at a direct link, but it's what mostly through a link, through a pact. So it's not, we don't know which person influenced the other one. It's not like a domino where one pushed the other one, is that they were on the same level, the same status, and decided together to commit suicide. So this is the situation. Count? Okay. So we'll go to maybe the very interesting, as you see in that picture, you see cul-de-sac, which means dead end. It's a photograph. He wanted to have a picture of the moral situation of his village. So the demoralization of communities is a big factor. I think in all the communities that we have visited, there was one of these factors present. There is a demographic decrease, migration of youth and the elite. People go to school outside and they stay outside. So there's been a diminution, except for First Nations. There's often been a decrease of population at the time around, before or around the series of suicide. There's also, people reported a change in traditional mode of production. In one case, it was the end of the fishing industry. In other, it's more the transformation of the forestry, wherever they were hiring hundreds of men, became the mechanization of this industry. You needed a technical formation to drive these big trucks or these complex instruments. So we found a low jobs for residents with no technical education. So people were kind of stuck in their environment without the possibility of really finding a jobs anymore. Few leisure activities for youth, with the situation that sometimes the local bar is the only way where they can meet. So the parents don't want their adolescents to get crazy in the house, so they give them permission to go and socialize at the bar. And very often the parents are also drinking a lot, so it's not so you have a high school tolerance for drugs and alcohol, and even in the school sometimes the teachers are also using drugs, and we found a place where the policeman, not the policeman, but the guardian, the security man of the school was the one who was selling the drugs to the pupils. So it's not like it's a transgression. It's all people consume sometimes in the villages. Sorry, I have to look on my paper because I don't see the last line here on my. Anyway, we'll go to the next because it's, oh yeah, it's sometimes it's a stigmatization of either the whole place. It could have happened before the beginning of the series or after the beginning of the series. There's a kind of a curse happening to the villages, and they are looked down by the surrounding villages. So that's a phenomenon also that will multiply the situation of demoralization in these communities. What we see also, I'll have to go a little bit faster here, experience of general demoralization. What's very important is the legitimation of the suicide scenario. I think there's a central point. I think that it's the explanatory factor which comes more to the fore, and we have seen it repeated in many villages. So I got some excerpts of interview. He said, one man said, he had to cope with his problem, he killed himself, now he has peace. So another one said, it was a period during which everybody, whatever the age, felt like dying from suicide. So people explain it like a wave, people are tempted to commit suicide because it's been legitimate by previous one. It's not so much that the status of the person, but the fact that he came to that conclusion and people were allowed to follow him. There's also other explanations, the work of the devil, and we've seen it not only in First Nation, but also in Quebec villages. And we've seen a seance of exorcisms by a priest with the seniors of his community. The concept of wave is very often used in the French villages. It's like the impression of being submerged by a tide, by maybe a feeling of demoralization. It's a flooding, it's an invasion. People feel like they lose the control over what's happening in their place. It's a tide of panic. And also we can see a certain sense of apathy, paralysis, because the trauma is just too much to digest. So people just sit and they don't know what to do next. So those are, and this can happen in the same village, but at different time. So there is an evolution of this feeling of demoralization. We have also a general depression. One person said in Causapscal, feeling like the village is dead. There is a big cloud over the village. And finally, the feeling of being stigmatized, especially that the village is a dead-end situation, and we don't know where to go next. There is a kind of paralysis of the economic life. Stores are closing, and services are moving to the next town. All these things contribute to give a sense of stigmatization. So my conclusion is that except for the PACs, the direct interpersonal influencing suicide are rather infrequent. So we're not really, in most cases, not witnessing a phenomena which is similar to a contagion. There are things that seems contagions, but it's more the demoralization than the direct influence of suicides. We have a general feeling also that suicide has become a legitimate way of solving personal problems. So I think that this is the major factor that's been reported within the communities, and we think is validated by the facts, is that, the scenario of suicide is something that's open, that's permitted, and it's been expressed by what we call, I don't know if in English it works, but the heroization, that making a first suicide like a hero, treated like a hero, with a lot, hundreds of persons going to the church. Sometimes the church of many hundreds is so full that there are people outside. So this is also a very common things that we see in those series of suicide. The third thing is the legitimation of the demoralization of the community. The legitimation, rather, is fed by demoralization. So, you cannot, a suicide will be felt legitimate if there is already a demoralization. If you want to start a fashion of suicide in one place, you won't get to it if there is not already a demoralization of the community. And it takes years to build. When you go back, these not are things that happen like a pandemic in a few months. They've been constructed over many years before. So what a few guidelines for the intervention. I think one of the main things is to control the tide of panic by immediately implementing a clear action plan. So it's to bring down the sentiment of panic, the lack of control, by having a clear action plan. It could be just to give the right information. People think that there are sometimes more suicides than there has been. Sometimes they are identified. In one case, one person came and said, so-and-so has died by suicide. Oh, it's terrible. Well, it just happened that that person had not been committed. I've not done suicide. So you see, there is false rumors that circulate. So it's to give the right time in terms of information. I think also the rebuilding the social image with concrete initiative. It could be some of the villages organize festivals to help finance the suicide prevention. So it did contribute very much to rebuild the concrete image in those villages. I think also it's important that the leaders have a discourse where they understand this phenomena from a point of view of social political, explain why there is a devitalized economy, and showing that there are macro factors that will influence the personal drama that people don't have to be personally responsible for what's happening, but something that that's macro over them. Certainly, we have to make postvention with the closed network, but people have been criticizing the people who were professionals. They say, yes, we should make intervention, but not with everybody. We should select people who really need it. And also, it's very odd also with young adults or adolescents because they are alienated from adults. And if they see a psychologist, they will have aggressive reactions toward these adults. So you have to be forgiven that you're an adult and to find other way than the regular therapeutic approach because it won't work with this person. And finally, we have another 2 minutes conclusion. So this is a festival which is called the Bug Out. I won't go into the details, but you see a demonstration of, I think there were 100 Volkswagen. It's a Volkswagen festival that one village organized to get money for suicide prevention. So there were many, despite the panic and the pain suffering during this outbreak of suicide, there was a collective reaction. Most of the places organized a public meeting where they discuss the situation, they organize committees. So there was a lot of positive reaction which have taken place not necessarily at the beginning, but at some point during the development of the series of suicide. And people have tried to build up the image of the communities, working also at the level of leisure with young people and all that. And so there's been positive outcomes in most of the places. So thank you very much for your attention. So I'll get back to Karen for
Thank you, Michel. I appreciate that. We have several questions, and I invite others to forward their questions as well. The first is one, a process piece about your research. And there was some concern expressed by one participant around the use of the actual names of the people who died by suicide, and wondered what your process was for getting consent to do that.
Yes, they exactly. It's an ethical question. They were in public reports. It's been in newspaper articles. So they were made public, and also there are series that happen for most part 20, 25 years before. So so I decided to put, at least for the, I don't know if I would publish them, but I decided to put them as such on the for a webinar at least. Yeah. I'm not sure if you published a webinar, if we will put it as such, or we'll put just the first name. Yeah, but these things have been published mostly in the newspapers and in documents, published documents.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions around definitions and some clarity around words. And one is, would you distinguish, or how would you distinguish between suicide clusters and a series of suicides? Is there a distinction?
Yes. Well, clusters is aggregation of suicides. That is, you have many suicides who could happen in a community. Like, for instance, we had in one community, we had 7 suicides in a small village of 2,000, but, you know, they were not related at all. There were no crises. 2 of the suicides were originating from tourists, you know, something who have a country place there. So we decided it's just a cluster, you know, there's no relationships. Whereas in the series, we try to find that people are related. They are friends, they have, you know, they have made projects together, or they're related by, they are part of a family and all that. So really, we try to find that there are links, important links, close links between the persons who have suicided. Does it make sense?
It does. Thank you so much. The next question is also a clarity question around defining direct link. Does it have to be a relative? You know, what goes into that definition? Who would you include?
Yeah, okay, I'll come back. It is that the first suicide is the triggering event for the second one, and no other major events have occurred for the second suicide, okay? So that's either the trauma, or having discovered, for instance, the corpse, and the other person didn't have any personal drama in his life in the meanwhile. Sometimes it happened very quickly, 1 month after. So we concluded that the first one was really directly instrumental in the second one. But what happened very often is that each of the suicide have to cope with his own serious problems. Could be the end of a long-term relationship. It could be that they are pursued by a mafia who's selling drugs. They have big debts and things like that. So they have other real serious problems to deal with. And we decided that it's more those problems that trigger their suicide than the first one. But the first one will increase the vulnerability, but it won't cause it.
Thank you.
I'm clear.
Yes. You know, and with respect to that, in your research, was there any indication that the person who actually discovered the deceased was at higher risk because of that discovery?
Yeah, you know, most people in these communities, especially the subgroups of young people, because it was very often a friend who discovered it, you know, because they had to enter in the house, or it was in the backyard. So he was usually not, you know, it's not like it's the police coming in, though it could be traumatic also for the policeman, but it was a close link that came and discovered the body. So we decided, because he didn't have new problems in the meanwhile, you know, he didn't have the end of romantic relationships, of things like that, which are usually associated with suicides. So we've decided that the last event was discovery of the body.
Thank you. There was also a comment made that in part of the aftermath, the importance of kind of matter-of-factly listing the cause of death in an open way, the way you would for any other medical condition or cause of death, as a way of destigmatizing. But the last two questions are both time related. One is, when we're looking at the notion of series or clusters, would you say within a year, are you putting a time frame around that? Like, what is your time perspective on that?
Well, I started, you know, with when when I got the grant, I started with really epidemiological approach. I had criteria, but it had to be 3 months between the suicide, no more. But if you get an ethnological approach, we see that people define it differently. And that's what would have affect the spirit of the place, if they have, no, it's more scattered than your definition. You say, well, there should be something, when people are related. So, and they died one after the other, they are about the same age, they were friends. So even if it's more than 3 months, they will relate to it, and it will affect the spirit of the community. So in that sense, we went away from a strict epidemiological approach to include a more ethnological consideration.
Thank you. So the other time related question has to do with support and postvention, which mostly tends to be targeted right after a death by suicide occurs. Based on both your research and your interactions in communities, what does that say about how long support and specific intervention should be in place after a death occurs?
Yeah, I think it's important to have a quick intervention with, especially with a few professionals from outside. The reason is that the people inside are personally affected by the suicides. They are also relatives. They live in the community. They have perhaps not the first, but when you have 4, 5, 6 suicides, everybody has some important link with someone else. So it's important to have help from the outside. That should be quick. And we see also that some of the people who are in close links with the suicides are especially at high risk. And some people will, find their own way of getting out of that, but others need some help. So there should be some help available in the immediate. It's an emergency situation, and it should be approached as such. And there is also the, you have to deal with the panic in the community. And so it's very hard for people inside the community to keep calm. So it's good that you have people from the outside who will, act on this panic sentiment, because I think it's important to have a clear plan of action. Could be very simple, and we see it with pandemic right now. People are a bit confused about where to go. So it's very important in all this situation that to have clear actions that are put into place.
Thank you, Michel. We have just, if in our last minute, and it literally is our last minute, if you could just say a word or two about impact on first responders, if you were able, to say a few words about that.
Yeah. Well, the first responder is terrible. You cannot train people to face situations like that, because it's a human experience. It's tragic. And we had one of the members of our team. He was a First Nation, and he was called to help to get a young woman down a tree. And it was terrible for him in the following months. And there is very little way to prevent the impact of the trauma. So I think it's, there's a collective action support should be brought, and, it will, so the first intervenants, and there are many, it could be the priest, it could be the police, It could be the social worker. It could be even the journalists who come on the site. They are all exposed to a very big impact. And the thing is to find some support to get through it. But there's no miracle solution to that. Each one has to go through his own way of mourning or getting over that situation.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Michel, for your very informative presentation and also thought-provoking. And I want to thank all of the participants who joined us today for this webinar. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for all of you.
The webinar is now complete.